harder to vote. And I know that's not the issue today of what happened last year, but I just want to set the table. There was, at the federal level, in the support of the Voting Rights Act, I was speaking out very vigorously in all of the things that we saw that were happening last year to try to suppress the vote, even though the reasons for the changes were so-called making sure that there was, I can hold up for you if
God bless you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
it's okay.
Audio, 10% of the production, 90% of the problem.
Right when he sat down, guys. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
I'll just shorten it. Last year was an attempt by the change in the law at the state of Florida to make it more difficult to vote. And the proof was in the pudding, because we saw people standing in line for 7 hours. What the government of the state ought to be doing is making it easier to vote, while at the same time ensure the integrity of the ballot. Now we have another example of a change, not in law, but a change in interpretation by the governor's hand-picked head of the Secretary of State's office, in an interpretation to say that supervisors of election cannot do what many of them have been doing for several years in order to make it easier to vote. And that is, more and more, as people are voting by absentee ballot, then to accommodate the interest of the voter, making it easy to be able to deposit that vote in a convenient location and a location that is secure. And thus, we are seeing played out right here in the Tampa Bay area, in a special congressional election in Pinellas County, what we are seeing is an attempt to make it more difficult for the voters to, in fact, deposit their vote that in the old days was called an absentee ballot. You've heard from the supervisor of Pinellas County. I'm looking forward to visiting with the supervisor later on this week from Pinellas. But today, we have the supervisor of Hillsborough. And Craig Latimer is going to tell us just how much more inconvenient this would be in Hillsborough County. This would not be as serious if we didn't already see the voting trends. Take, for example, Pinellas County. Out of somewhere around 250,000 votes that were cast in the last election, over 100,000, or 42%, were cast by an absentee ballot. And therefore, if that big of a percentage of the body of voters is voting that particular method, then should not we make it easier instead of harder to cast what is one of the most precious rights that we can exercise under a constitutional democracy? And that is the right not only to cast our vote, but to have the sanctity of knowing that that vote is going to be counted. So, Craig, I want to thank you for coming. If you would share with us the specifics of Hillsborough County and just what this is going to be doing. In the course of the week, since the Senate is not in session this week, I will be visiting with other supervisors. Several later on this week. Tomorrow I'll be with the supervisor down in Palm Beach County.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir.
In Hillsborough County here, this last election, we had 15 early vote sites. 13 of those sites were at libraries around the county depicted in this map. And let me just remind you, Hillsborough County is a county of 1,000 square miles. So we're talking about convenience to voters. If we were to adhere to this directive, we would immediately lose 13 of these sites around the county. And the only 2 sites you could deposit a vote-by-mail ballot would be at our downtown office, if you can find parking in the area, or out in Brandon at the Gilder Service Center. It would be a great loss to the people in our community. Many people like the security of being able to walk up and put their ballot into a locked and sealed ballot box, knowing that we're going to be the ones transporting that ballot back to the office to be counted and to be taken care of. This is not a way to get people to vote. This is not a way to get people, encourage them to vote by mail and that their ballot can be counted. I've had several people ask me, and I will tell you right now, go on the record, that if I had an election coming up tomorrow or next week, I would be right there with Deb Clark. I would not be closing these sites down because I know they're secure, I know they're safe, and I also know that they're convenient to the voters in our community.
Questions?
Deborah Clark has said she will defy the governor's instruction, and your reaction to that, and the question for you, will you be doing the same thing?
Well, she has the first election because it's coming very shortly. And my reaction to that is she has been conducting this since 2008. It has been a convenience for her voters. She vigorously disagrees with the interpretation by Mr. Detzner, the Secretary of State. And I believe that there are federal issues of voting rights that attach to this. So clearly, I support her in her efforts.
Yeah, as I said, if I had an election tomorrow, I would be doing the exact same thing Deb Clark has done. I applaud her for what she is doing. I said before that this is a solution to a problem that didn't exist. I can tell you that since 2009 that I'm aware of, every year we have put in our plans that we send to the state that this is how we collect vote-by-mail ballots at an election. This isn't news to the state. This isn't something new. This is something that's been going on for years. I would also remind you that in the 2012 election, the Secretary of State is the same Secretary of State now. And everything was fine in the 2012 election. Now all of a sudden, it's not okay to do it that way.
Have you ever seen anything?
Bottom line is that we ought to be making it easier and convenient for voters to cast a ballot, not making it more difficult.
The governor's motive?
Well, clearly to me, it's a motive of trying to suppress the vote in a low turnout congressional election in the 13th Congressional District in Pinellas County. The timing is extraordinary. The legal justification is specious, and I don't think that there is a court in Florida that would uphold the governor's position.
Do you plan any sort of legal challenge to the governor's position?
I'm looking at it from the standpoint of the federal law of the Voting Rights Act as well as the HAVA Act, which is an act from a few years ago that gave to the various states, including Florida, monies to help streamline and make easier their voting systems for voters. And the state of Florida has accepted those funds.
What are the consequences for if Deborah Clark goes against this order? What happens?
I don't think there are any consequences. I think she's continuing to do what she thinks is and has been done to the convenience of her voters with the security. See, that box, as stated by Mrs. Clark, that box has a deputized supervisor of elections staff person that is with that box. Now, it's my understanding that they're collected each night and
Every day.
brought to the central repository.
Every day, and accounted for, seal numbers on it, so you match up seal numbers, we know where boxes come from, they're inventoried, they're turned out the next day.
Senator, as I understand it, Secretary Detzner's possible legal alternative to enforce his directive, if he wants to try, he can't sanction a supervisor, but he could conceivably go to court to try to enforce his directive. If he does, can you give me any sense of what the reaction of either of you two, either or both of you two, might be?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, the supervisor of election is a constitutional office set up under the Constitution of the state of Florida with a great deal of history. Secondly, the supervisors of election are not appointed. They are directly responsible to the voters of their county. Now, right there, you have two inherent major legal foundations upon which the supervisors must execute their office and do it in a way that protects the interest of the voters. I think any court in this state will uphold the supervisor's right to do that, unless it is directly being overtaken by state law or federal law, of which there is none. This is a Secretary of State's interpretation on a whim. Why now, on the eve of a special congressional election, instead of for the last 5 years, since Mrs. Clark has in fact been having the convenient locations for people to utilize the absentee ballot?
Senator, since you mentioned the possible violation of federal voting rights, have you had any communications with the Department of Justice or Federal Elections Commission regarding the legalities or illegalities of this?
For the last 2 days, I have been on an aircraft carrier watching war games in the Atlantic Ocean. So I have not had that chance. But my office, at my direction today, when I returned, has already started the process of the discussions with the Department of Justice and the administration of the HAVA Act, as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Senator, you used the word suppress. That's pretty strong language. Are you directing that at Mr. Dempster, or are you directing it at Governor Scott?
Whoever is responsible for this particular edict is attempting to suppress the vote, just like was done last year in the constriction of the early voting hours and the days of early voting, which resulted in some cases in Miami of people standing in line. And the only reason that suppression attempt last year was not successful was when the people caught on to what was happening in a presidential election. They said, "You're not going to take my vote away from me," and some people stood in line for 7 hours. There was a lady in Miami over 100 years of age, and the number of hours that she stood in line was something like 3 hours. It became a cause célèbre. People were bringing her water. They were bringing her chairs as she continued, over 100 years of age. And they were not going to take her vote away from her. And that's why it was not successful last year.
But that was legislative. This is a singular act. Are you saying Governor Scott is trying to suppress the congressional vote for Bill Young's seat?
I'm saying just exactly what I've said.
Senator,
This is,
just
yes.
to take that a step further,
Yes.
when you talk about suppressing the vote, what you're really saying is you believe it's going to suppress the Democratic side of the ticket vote versus the Republican, aren't you? Is there a
Well,
basis for that?
I think this is not shades of partisan eye shades that are put on. It seems to me that if you make it inconvenient, if you cause voters to travel long distances from what they are accustomed to traveling, if they want to vote by mail or vote by absentee vote, therefore you put up a barrier in their way to casting their vote. And I think that's blind as it comes to party, because that will affect Republicans, Democrats, and independents.
But is it not true that the people who have the hardest time getting to the polls tend to be, lower income minority voters who tend to lean more to the left?
Well, what you would want to do, you'd have to, in order to answer that, you'd have to do analysis of presidential election versus a non-presidential election, and especially a special election, which is typically very low turnout.
Senator, if the motive
And
is...
let me finish.
I'm sorry.
And as a result, if you would look, an astounding figure in Pinellas of 42% of the vote that was cast, what they call vote by mail, which is also absentee. 42% of the vote. I would think that if you analyze that, you'd see in a high turnout presidential election that it was affecting everybody, but there might be a demographic that it was affecting more. I don't know the answer to that. But now when you have a much lower turnout special election, this makes every vote absolutely critical. Now, of course, we know in Florida that every vote's critical in a presidential as well, if you can remember the 2000 election. And of course, this last presidential was decided by only 74,000 votes in the state of Florida. Yes, Wendy?
Sorry to interrupt you a moment ago, Senator. If the motive isn't partisan, then what do you think the motive is?
Well, you all would like me to stand up here and bang the table and talk about
Good
a
video.
partisan thing. I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is this is so obvious that it is making it harder to vote for average folks, whether they're Republican or Democrat, that we ought to stop this nonsense. And I'm so proud of people like Craig and Mrs. Clark for standing up and saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do what's in the best interest of people at the same time of protecting the sanctity of the vote.
If I could answer your question from my perspective.
Yes, sir.
I have a saying in my office, there's elections and there's politics. We do elections in my office. And that's what this is directly related to, is elections, because it's my job to make sure that people can vote fairly, conveniently, and securely, and that their vote's going to be counted. And that's what this is all about for me. If the Secretary of State spent as much time and energy in registering people to vote and getting out the vote as they have with a faulty purge, directives like this, trying to change state law, putting together packages of law that no supervisor ever asked for, if they spend that much time and energy into getting people out to vote and getting people registered to vote, our state would be a lot better off.
Mr. Lammer, along those lines, can you please talk about, there seems to be an implication here of voter fraud when associated with these sorts of methods of collecting people's votes?
Well, there's already state law in place about how many ballots that you can collect. That has nothing to do with a person walking up here and dropping a ballot into this ballot box. I don't believe it has any correlation to voter fraud whatsoever. It has to do with convenience to voters.
Have you sent a responding answer back to the
I have
Secretary? What about you, Senator? Have you called the governor or sent anything to the Secretary of State?
Ma'am, I just got off an aircraft.
Which aircraft carrier? I do veterans.
The George H.W. Bush. It's doing war games in the Atlantic off of Florida. And I'll tell you, if you all could see what I saw, you'd be so proud of those 5,000 sailors that I've been with for the last 2 days.
Governor, excuse me, Senator, your thoughts on... This was my next question, actually. Your thoughts on this seemingly endless string of elections controversies representing the state of Florida?
Before we get into politics, and I'm happy to talk to you about politics, but let's, as Craig says, they can do elections and politics, and he does elections. Do you want to show them anything else on your maps over there?
Just, again, I think you can see that there's, Hillsborough County is a large county, 1,000 square miles. And these red places are all drop-off points where people can conveniently drop off their vote-by-mail ballot at early voting sites. Not within the early voting site, but at the library where these early votes are taking place at that time. This has been a practice that's been going on for years. People are used to it. People have been trained to do that. They know they can get in their car or even walk to a neighborhood post office or a neighborhood library, and they can safely deposit into this box their ballot. Now there's another thing to this too. We, believe it or not, we get a lot of people, they say, well, I don't want to vote by mail because I don't get an I voted sticker. Well, we line this with I voted stickers, and we actually make sure the people sign their ballot so that it's going to count, and then they're allowed to deposit themselves their ballot into this ballot box. You can see it has a seal on it. It's numbered.
Can you pull it out? Perfect.
It has a seal on it that's numbered. It also has a lock on it. This is staffed by a person.
Craig, they want you to talk
Near the mics, yeah.
This is staffed by a person who works for me, who is deputized in the election process, and they're with this box at all times. The boxes are then brought back to my office every night. The ballots are taken out under 24/7 video surveillance, where they're then housed in our main office out at the Gilder Service Center in Brandon.
The way that you explain it sounds like you're almost offended by the idea that somebody would suggest that there's something missing with that.
I am. I think it's ridiculous. Like I said, I was flabbergasted when this directive came out. This is a solution to a problem that didn't exist. We have excellent practices in place, very safe and secure. If you read that directive and you adhere to that directive, that would mean that I could not take this ballot box right here and put it outside the front door to my office with somebody sitting in a chair for you to conveniently come by and drop it in at my main office. I couldn't do it. That's not right. I believe it's way outside the legal boundaries of the Secretary of State to come out with an opinion like this.
Mr. Latimer, can you tell us a little bit about how many people vote at the libraries or cast their vote-by-mail votes?
In
Hillsborough
County, we had over 10,000 people that deposited their ballots at drop-off sites at libraries and at the main offices.
In 2012?
In 2012, yes.
When did you start the voting at the libraries, the drop-off sites? How many years have you had that?
I've been with the office since 2009, and it's been since then, I can tell you. And I know they did it in the 2008 election also.
Picking up on Sharon's appropriate slip, when will you be announcing that you're ready to go?
I'll get up close to the mic. I have no plans to run for governor. I have no intention of running for governor. I have my hands full as senator, and unfortunately, I shouldn't be having to deal with this. But I'm not going to stand by and let the state of Florida go through something like it did last year with the state of Florida government apparatus trying to suppress people's vote. And here is another example of it. And so I'm going to stand up foursquare with the supervisors of election who are duly elected constitutional officers of this state in order for them to perform their duties well. Folks, I call it like I see it. And this could portend a very bad thing for the state of Florida if we let them get away with this.